So Chapter 8, the multidimensional arrays. Like some of you said, we use this for the database, right? So this is an example that I try to show you the student scores, but this one we're looking at like the distance. Of course, when you declare an array to store data, it has to be the same data type. So distance could be an int, and you can see a distance between the capital of each state, right? Chicago to Boston, Chicago to New York, and so on. So we can use the two-dimensional arrays to help. And this is the way that we declare it. Besides giving the index and assign the number, we can also initialize it inside the curly braces. Alright, so this is a row for each row of the data. So the set of each row. And this is the columns, right? So once again, we go look at the same example. So from last record, we look at in the term of initialize using index, right? Like we were assigning the values this way. After we declare it, we said scores 0 and 0, which referring to C2 here, 95, right? And then we keep doing that for each of this 0, 1. 0 refer to like row 0. And of course we have to look at the same data type, so we only capture the numbers, right? 95, 88. This is for 0, 1, right? Row 0 column 1. And row 0 in columns 2, which is 86. So we're gonna do the same with row 1, right? Column 0, row 1, column 1, and row 1, column 2, which is gonna be 90, 78, and 55. Alright, so we said instead of doing this way, we can technically do another way, right? Or you can just say double and put the brackets for two-dimensional array with the same data here. We can just initialize it in the bracket. So the first set pretty much is the row, first row, row 0, which is 95, 88, and 86. And then comma to separate, which is row 1, 90, 78, and 55. So this is another way to do it. So let's test this. So I'm going to put this into IntelliJ IDEA, create a new class named two-dimensional arrays, and we're going to do the method, right? Public statics void main string args to test if this working as we expected to initialize this way. So we're going to need to write a loops, right? So again, for int I equals to 0, I less than scores dot. So this is two-dimensional array, so the first one will refer to the row, right? So actually the better name, I'm going to name it row scores dot length and spelling scores, and this is going to be row, and row plus plus. So this is try to iterate to each row, like first row is the first data set here, and this is the second row, and for each row we have to iterate into each columns, which is this each data, 3 columns here, like 2 rows and 3 columns. So for int columns equals to 0, column less than, so we're gonna do scores, and this is 2-dimensional, so we're gonna refer to the row dot length and column plus plus. So when we go to each row, we refer to the length, which is this row has 3 columns, so it's going to be columns, and then it's going to print out the scores. Which is specified by row and column. Now this will print the first row, right? The first row that has all the data, 95, 88, and 86. Then if we want to make it to a new line, once it's done with the first row, then we're going to say go to a new line here, then start to increment to the second row, right, from here, and then print the data for the second row out. So let's run the program and see if we get the expected output, which should look similar to this table, but in the set of the number first. There are 2 main. Now when you hit display, it may be confusing about which main we are calling. Since I have 2 main, main.java has main here, so it's actually picking up main.java one. So we're going to have to right click and run. So it's going to specify this one. Now I don't want it to keep printing the line for each dataset, so I'm going to just do print instead of print line here, and then put spaces between the number. So concatenate with spaces. So we have the data as we expected print out. So meaning that we can initialize the array this way to have the data printing out, or we can do it this way. So now the size is going to be 2 row first and then 3 columns. So rows and columns. So now I'm going to comment the other way that we initialize the sets with the curly braces, and do the initialize by using index to prove that they're pretty much doing the same thing. So we get the same output. Alright, so now we come back to look at the objectives of this chapter. Why we want to use the multidimensional arrays. So we look at the example of using 2-dimensional arrays that I just shown. So how to declare them, like there are 2 ways to declare, right? These are 2 ways. And how to access an array elements. So I just show you in the code using loops to access an array with row and columns, and access through the index that increment through the loops. So the common application that we use for 2-dimensional arrays, it could be a table that we should store for student scores or the distance between cities, Or when you look at when you want to collect the data, right, with the same data type and with different row and columns, so we can use that. Now, another application could be when you want to sum, right, or finding min and max of the data from the data sets, or you can random shuffling the numbers. So we can look at the logic in here too. You can also pass we know single dimension array can pass through the parameters of the method, so as well as the two-dimensional arrays can do. So, and this slide will cover an example of grading multiple choice questions using two-dimensional arrays. Another one is solve the closest pair problem using two-dimensional arrays, and use the Sudoku solution, find a solution for Sudoku, check solution, use the two-dimensional arrays, and the use of multi-dimensional arrays, right? So we talk about how to initialize them. So we could just declare the reference and creating an array afterward, or you can do a new line like that. And like I said before, the brackets can be before, like two curly brackets, two the square brackets can come in front of the name or right after the name. So this is an example how you declare them. So of course always give the size, row and columns, and this is to initialize the values. Besides using this, you can also randomly generate the numbers to populate into array. In that case, we can just use the loop, nested loops to help. The same principle with the length dot length row. This one use I and columns use J. Right, so randomly generate the numbers assigned to array. And that is just an image of two-dimensional arrays when you declare with 5 by 5 index 0 to 4 rows and columns 0 to 4, and you start to initialize to 1, data 7 is just stored right there. But if you do initialize this way with a set format, then it's going to store as rows data. Now let's look at where the array dot length. This should give you the row, which in this case is 4. And where you specify array 0, that means at the row 0 I want to see what's the length of the columns, so that's why we get 3 back. So we have looked at this already, like when we get the length, it's going to return 4 because it's of this declared as 4, right? This should give you 3, right? Now, what happens if we know this is 0, 1, 2, 3, right? 4 rows, right? Index 0 to 4, but you happen to put index 4. You will get an exception array, index outbound exception. A lot of you, when you first start programming with array, you see this a lot. So don't be panicked. It's just like the location that is referred to is invalid. So that's pretty much what it is. And we have what we call ragged arrays. Remember, when I have first row, matrix 0 dot length is going to be 5 because we have 5 columns. But ragged means like you don't need to have the full arrays, right? Like this one, the second row has length as 4, third length as 3, and second length as 2, and last one length as 1. You can do that too. So this is called a ragged array.